Okay, so I will not make too many words at the beginning. It's just we are happy to be here. And I say we because we are a team. And this is Ralf Kammer and Claudia Bernhard and myself. And we have done the same job. Thank you. We have worked on the same subject as you did here in Holland. And you will see now what the outcome of our thoughts was. So, let us just start. Nor aught nor naught existes, yon bright sky was not, nor even heaven's broad roof outstretched above. What covered all, what sheltered, what concealed? Was it the water's fathomless abyss? There was not death, yet there was not immortal. There was no confine betwixt day and night. The only one breathed breathless by itself. Other than it, there nothing since has been. Darkness there was, and all at first was veiled in gloom profound, an ocean without light. The germ that still lay covered in the husk burst forth, one nature from the fervent heat. Who knows the secret? Who proclaimed it here? Whence this manifold creation sprang? The gods themselves came later into being. Who knows from whence this great creation sprang? That whence all this creation came, whether its will created or was mute. The Most High Seer that is in highest heaven, he knows it, or perchance even he knows not. Gazing into eternity, ere the foundations of the earth were laid, thou wert. And when the subterranean flame shall burst its prison and devour the frame, thou shalt be as thou wert before, and knew no change when time shall be no more. O endless thought, divine eternity. This part, ladies and gentlemen, of the Rig Veda, cited by H.P. Blavatsky at the beginning of her magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine, wonderfully leads us to the question we had in mind when we started our investigation about growth or evolution. And it is on this background that such a question like, is growth an illusion, came up. Every living entity, every living being is a spark of the divinity on its way either downwards to matter, to manifestation, or upwards to spirit, thus uplifting the material clothes on a higher level. The goal, or meaning, or purpose, call it like you wish, is always to climb the next step of the ladder of evolution by widening, activating its consciousness. And its journey leads it always back to the one source from which it came down to manifestation. Ere the foundations of the earth were laid, thou wert, and when the subterraneous flame shall burst its prison and devour the frame, thou shalt be still as thou wert before, and knew no change when time shall be no more. So, nothing changed? Nothing? Do we have to draw the conclusion from this wonderful verse that all our endeavors are in vain because at the end nothing will change? Then growth is an illusion? There seems to be a contradiction between those words and what we see and experience in our lives. Would it not be horrible to think that everything remains unchanged, always the same? Growth an impossible illusion, instead stagnation, death? We are also touching here an important point in Buddhist thought, which is that of Maya or illusion. Buddhism in general assumes that the world is a cosmic flux of momentary interconnected events, dharmas, no matter of how the reality of these events might be viewed. Nagarjuna of the Madhyamika school in the 2nd century sought to demonstrate that the flux itself could not be held to be real, nor could the consciousness perceiving it as itself is part of this flux. He pointed out that reality can only be attributed to something entirely different from all that is known, which must therefore have no identifiable predicates and qualities, and therefore can only be described as the void, sunyata. For example, for the Madhyamika school of Buddhism, all manifestation is illusion, as it is only a reflection of the Absolute, and is never perceived as it is, but limited by illusionary faculties, because the moment there is something to perceive it, it would be a manifested thing, and therefore an illusion too, which can never reach reality. Now, our experience and our senses show us that growth is a fact in nature. The universe is expanding, scientists tell us, and every child knows and tells his mother, when I'm grown up, I can do many things on my own. We see physical bodies growing, flowers and trees grow around us, and the physical growth is just the outer shell of the inner impulse. There is growth of understanding while human beings grow up and learn. And we do know that there is no end of learning in our life, although some people do not like this idea. And learning means growing, means evolving into something greater, stretching out for a wider horizon of understanding. So, is this a contradiction with the above cited statement of the Rig Veda? Well, the answer is not so difficult to find, although it took me quite some good time to find it out, believe me. It is always our own brain-mind we stumble upon. There were so many questions like, if the particles of the whole are growing and changing, then does the whole not grow and change too? Of course it does. If you add something to something, then you have more, don't you? But if you do not add something, but just change its quality to something better, greater in condition, what then? This is also a kind of growth or evolution. And this kind of growth is the case when you have latent possibilities, faculties, which you bring to activity or manifestation. The answer is simply no. There is no contradiction. We cannot compare the manifested, limited, time-bound with an unmanifested, abstract principle. This is impossible and would never work. Whatever we look at or observe in this manifested world is limited in time, space, and quality, submitted to the circulations of re-embodiment, thus gaining experiences, and by those experiences growing more and more to more and more understanding. As we have seen already several times today, other speakers have mentioned it too, the universe is nothing else but consciousness in its different stages and expressions. The consciousness of a stone differs enormously from the consciousness of a plant or a human being or a master, etc. But as Pythagoras, the Greek, pointed out, each point in space is consciousness. Consciousness is another word for life. If each atom, each molecule has it or is consciousness of its own specification and level. That means stage or status of development. If we don't want to get lost in the wideness of the universe, we can just use the key of analogy and look at us human beings to analyze the question. Have a look at our growth even during one incarnation. We are born, sleeping, and dreaming. As we grow up from childhood to adults, we are awaking more and more, until our consciousness being reaches its heights and withdraws again to the hidden spheres of nature, to a phase of assimilation and rest, until it is again drawn back to this earth for further experiences. Our consciousness is thus cyclically passing through various conditions. Take the example of a flower. While growing and bringing out blossoms, it is always turning towards the sun. It is nothing else than a ray of consciousness manifesting on this earth at this certain place at a certain limited time, which after its cycle of development returns to its source. Where is this source? Our imagination is wandering farther and farther through the vastness of the universe until we reach the point where our imagination stops. Neither words nor pictures are there, and we can only use very abstract ideas of principles. Like this flower, directing to the sun all growth, all development, is aligned to or directed to its original source, which is described by HPB as an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of Mandukya, unthinkable and unspeakable. This is the target of all development, of all evolution, all growth, a target which means perfection. Be as perfect as your Father in heaven is a quoting from the Bible, from Matthew. But this target can never be fully reached. It can only be approached and approximated in steps or levels of relative perfection, depending on the specific level of evolution which an entity is using for manifestation, according to his level of awakened consciousness. This relative perfection can be reached, but never will perfection be finally reached, because there is no end, as the target is eternal and boundless. Reaching it would mean stagnancy and limitation, a stop of motion, which is one of the fundamental principles in duration and space. You can compare it to the horizon, which always moves back as we try to reach it. And this is one of the reasons why we say the journey is the reward, because it leads you to a partial perfection. So by evolution or growth, a being seeks unity with the boundless through a change in its state of consciousness, be it a plant, an animal, or a human being, throughout all the different forms or stages or expressions of consciousness, as we have already mentioned. If we now have a look from a wider perspective, we will realize that it is always the same process, the same law, in its rotating form of action, which we know, for example, as saying, God sleeps in stone, breathes in plants, dreams in animals, and awakens in men. This is mentioned as a Hindu saying, or from Indian mythology, and in Germany it is often ascribed to Angelus Silesius, and from those different quotings you see it as a kind of universal saying. And this saying wonderfully describes the process of awakening consciousness, passing different states of conditions, which we, in the case of a human being, know as Jagrat, the awakenedness, Swapna, the dreaming condition, and Sushupti, the dreamless sleep, the purest being one with the essential mind principle within us, and last but not least, the Turiya Samadhi, which is the same as Sushupti, but on a much higher level, which means for a longer or shorter time, being one with one's own essential being or one's own inner God. This is the journey of the divine spark, which from the ocean of being, by passing the various kingdoms of life on the descending bow to matter, through its deepest points, climbs up the ascending bow to spirit, to self-conscious being. And this means that it will, in far-off times, after many cycles, rise even above human consciousness, to the awake and all-permeating consciousness of the highest gods. Again and again, cycle after cycle, and cycles follow and bring to blossom all the qualities of the manifested entity, in our case the human being, qualities which all were inherent, latent, sleeping, and are awakened one after the other to full perfection of self-consciousness. It is, in short, a ray of consciousness which from the boundless was emanated by the first cause, and which traveled through and manifested in the all lower kingdoms of life, until it finally reached our human kingdom, and is now on its way back home from unconditioned consciousness, as HPB called it, to a condition without any quality, absolute consciousness, to full self-consciousness. And exactly this is the meaning and the purpose of unlimited growth through the eternities. Let me close then with GDP's word and thus give space for my fellow students to continue and deepen our thoughts. It is thus a curious paradox that the self-consciousness which we humans so much value, and very rightly so, because it is in this manner that the reflected or self-cognizing function of consciousness is produced, is a temporary or transitory phase in the unfolding or unrolling or evolution of pure consciousness itself. When we shall have outgrown the existence within us of these various knots or foci of consciousness, which make us men with our limitations of consciousness, of which the circumscribing self-consciousness is one, then our essential consciousness will become cosmic in its reaches. Then the individual dewdrop slips into the shining sea. We shall then be 1,000,000 or 1,000 million times as conscious as at present, but no longer self-conscious on these lower planes, but nevertheless we shall be self-conscious on far higher planes, because we shall then be peregrinating and evolving through them, producing therein the then superior knots or foci of consciousness, such as we now produce on these planes of matter. We shall from human have become spiritual. Thank you.